I want you to go ahead and find your Bible or whatever you're using with the word in it. Get to the first verse of the first chapter of the first book. And I'll catch up with you in just a minute. While you're doing that, I do want to wish you again, as we keep saying, Happy New Year to one another. And I want to know if you have been resolving to be intentional about the changes that are certain to happen this coming year. That is what our resolution is really all about, right? For example, your physical fitness is going to change in the next year. It's going to be. You may become more fit, you may become less fit, but it's going to change one way or the other. You can, by intention, make some choices to impact your physical fitness. Of course, there are a lot of factors that you can't do anything about that comes to your physical fitness, but there are those factors that you can have some control over. You might decide that, this year I just want to be fit enough that I can take one of those hikes around Los Alamos that are beautiful and not be just completely wiped out at the end of it. I just want to be that fit. And so you might make some choices to say, I'm going to resolve to maybe start tracking my steps and maybe give myself a goal. I'm going to do 10,000 steps a day until I can get up to that point where I can take those hikes and not just be wore out, but really enjoy it. Or you might decide, I'm really physically fit enough. I am like way overfit, and so I'm just going to try to decide that I'm just going to relax a little more this year. I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to sit on the couch a little more. I'm going to watch a little more TV, and I'm going to see if I can kind of bring my fitness down a little bit. Whatever it is that you do, if you just keep doing it consistently enough, intentionally, you're going to be changing that aspect of your life. The same can be said also of our spiritual fitness. Your spiritual fitness is going to change this year, guaranteed. You can just keep going along as it is. You don't have to make any resolutions. It's going to change. It might be for the better. It might be for the worse. I've always liked the Apostle Paul's spiritual fitness resolve when he said, I'm going to live for Christ. I'm not alone in liking it. There are a lot of believers who have come to call that kind of statement, that kind of lifestyle choice, surrendered living. They could be living for Christ. And there are a lot of resolutions that you can make that would intentionally impact how well you will end up living for Christ in this next year. Our daily choices that result in surrendered living ultimately are based on how much we know about the Bible. Really, knowing the Bible is very practical in that sense. Now, I'm not talking about an academic knowledge, approaching the Bible like some subject you would at a school. I'm talking about becoming familiar with the stories of the Bible so that you can recall them in such a way that they'll help you to think about your situation in life. And you can say, I remember that story, and I'm going to kind of do that kind of thing in this situation. Or whenever I'm facing this decision, those stories will come up and they'll inform us of how to make that surrendered living choices. So I've just resolved to focus my sermons this year on the 52 key Bible stories that lay a foundation for our faith and our practice. I thought at first the problem would be coming up with 52 stories to kind of figure out the years. There are a couple of extra ones in there because we always get other stuff that happened through the year. And I thought, this will be enough. But what I found was that it was probably more difficult to get it down to 52 than it was to get it up to 52 to follow all the Sundays. There really are a lot of stories. Whenever I look for some pre-made lists, some lists of best Bible stories, children's Bible stories, favorite Bible stories. I even created my own list at one point, and I just had trouble getting it down to just 52 that would be the important ones. The other problem I have with getting it down to 52 stories is that I'm almost a little bit anti-list when it comes to things about the Bible. I was taught, and maybe you've heard it too, that if you say more than what the Bible says, you've just said too much. And if you say less than what the Bible says, well, you haven't said enough. And that was just sort of a saying to say, hey, let's just stick to what the Bible is, we'll read it and go along with it. But I know a lot of people make resolves to read the whole Bible, and they just don't get very far. And they certainly don't get to applications or how it impacts their lives. And so I'm not going to challenge you to do that kind of thing, but maybe through the whole year, at least one day a week, we can take on one of these stories. I'm relying on a list of the 52 key Bible stories from a place called Rose Publishing. They have this little pamphlet you can get. I got the electronic version. It's about $5 for the paper one or $4 for the PDF version. And it provides a little summary of each of the stories, some important lessons to learn from those stories, and how we can kind of reacquaint ourselves with those things that we should know well. I'll be sharing a link to that website if you want to get that resource, and I'll send it out in email. So if you're not a part of the church's email, put it on a card and give it to us. We'll get that link to you so you can pick that out. The first of these stories is what we read earlier. It's found in that first chapter, the first book, the book of Genesis. I don't know if you know this, but Genesis is just a word that means beginnings. And that happens to be the very first word of the book in the Hebrew text. It's a good name for this book because it answers questions about who we are and where we've come from and where we're going, especially in these first couple of chapters of it. But I want to warn you in advance, this is a divisive book. These opening verses are divisive verses. I've probably seen more fights in churches over these verses than anything else. There are a lot of very, very strong opinions as to whether these words should be taken literally or figuratively or mythologically. And I've heard all sides of it, and I've seen some pretty ugly things come out of what I think God intended to draw us together in unity. Personally, I just take it as God's word. It reveals to us what we could never learn by mere observation. God inspired the author to record it in a way that would help us understand Him better, our origin better, and the world around us in a way that helps us to find our place in it. It doesn't answer all of the questions that I have about the beginning, because the Bible is focused on the story of salvation. It may actually bring up more questions than it answers as we go through it. But it tells us everything we need to know about our origins to understand who can save us and that we do need to be saved. So first of all, I want you to hear the story of our beginning. So we're going to read it together. And then I'm going to just highlight a few of the lessons from it that you could learn that would help you with this surrendered living choices that we all want in our lives so that we can make some intentional changes to have a better year. Since we've already read those first 5 verses, I'm going to begin in verse 6. I'm going to be reading from the New American Standard Bible, I think is what I told you to put on there. I may actually change that. I don't have to read up here from it. I put in here the New International Version, 84, so it may change difference in there. Whatever your version you read, it's not going to change that much. Most of the versions have changes because there are some translations that are trying to follow the word order in Hebrew. Some of them are trying to follow the idea order, keeping the ideas together. There are some of them that are concerned about gender. And so they go through there and they change the gender a little bit to make it more palatable for people who have those concerns. So we're going to read together, and I'm just going to read from up here as you go through on these. So let's read this origin story. Starting in 6. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and in the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind with the seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind, and God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, the third day. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. Then God said, let the water teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth and in the open expanse of the heavens. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw that he made, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all of their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. That's the end of the main part of the origin story. There are so many lessons that we could learn from that story. So many times whenever we're dealing with issues in our lives, or discussions about how we perceive the world around us, that we could turn to the story and find answers that would help us wade through the discussions. And I only want to highlight a few of them for you. We're not going to cover all the lessons. But one of the first lessons that I want you to learn from this story is that there was a beginning, a starting point, a moment when the heavens and the earth were created by God. A beginning has been theorized by natural scientists, but they don't all agree on whether there really was a beginning or not. I don't know if you've read a lot of those kinds of authors or not, but they're pretty fascinating. Many of them don't like that a beginning affirms the Bible's creation narrative, so they often do everything they can to disassociate their scientific conclusion that there was a beginning from what the Bible reveals about there being a beginning. The possibility of the Bible might be right about the beginning sends other scientific theorists in the completely opposite direction. They're out there searching for an origin story that doesn't have a beginning. I don't know how you can have an origin story without a beginning, but they're looking for one. But I really think they don't have to do that, because I don't know any naturalistic scientist that would ever affirm that it was God who created the heavens and the earth. They simply won't accept anything but a naturalistic cause as a valid explanation, which is really sort of unfortunate, since it is God who's not natural in that sense, which is the initiator, the creator, the one who brought about the beginning. So by definition, they completely rule him out. We, nor the world in which we live, was really an accident when we speak of God as being the creator of it. He has made us with purpose. He has made us with identity. He has made us with love, and he has made us with relationship in mind. You could probably go on and add a lot of things on why God has put us together as creation, but there's purpose to it. There's reason behind it. Ignoring the lessons that you could learn from this story is why so many people today struggle with their own identity and purpose. I'm sure you've heard and read about the people who they simply don't know who they are, and they're being told by others what they are and how they are. And these other people are telling them the things that they have to change about themselves in order to be who they are. And it's really sad. I mean, a lot of them are actually harming themselves because they are not being told the truth, that they have identity, they have purpose, and God has made them exactly the way they should be and how they can celebrate it. How much better it would be to embrace the truth that we're all made in the image of God. There's not one person who's not made in the image of God. And what a great image to reflect. And not only are we made in the image of God, but we're giving this purpose of being the stewards, the ones who rule over the world around us. Not simply the abusers of or the users up of, but the stewards of. The ones who are supposed to be taking care of this world that we live in. And if it's all done well, at least by this story, our basic needs are going to be met because God has provided in the order of this creation everything we need, not just to survive, but to thrive. And so there's got to be some reasons on why it's not as it's intended. Second lesson I want you to sort of pick up on is that we learn the name of the Creator. It doesn't really come across too much in English, but the word that gets translated God is the name of the Creator. It's the word Elohim. It's a word that's composed in Hebrew out of the 3 or more plural ending in the Hebrew grammar. I know that this is not going to mean a lot to you, but in Hebrew they had different kinds of endings where it's kind of like we do. We either have singular or plural. But they had singular, and then they had an ending that meant only 2 of, and then they had an ending for 3 or more. And the im ending in Elohim is that 3 or more ending. So God's name is El plus this 3 or more ending. El means strong. And it was used as a general reference to any deity back in those days. They would call all deities this word for strong. For these ancient people had this crazy idea that if it was a deity, it needed to be strong enough to do something that they couldn't do on their own. And so they just called deities strong, El, or Elohim, the plural, strong. And I kind of feel the same way today. I mean, why would I ever seek help from a God if I could do it myself to start with? I'm one of those guys. If it can be done and I can do it, I want to do it. And why would I turn to a God for help if that God isn't strong enough to do not only what I can't do for myself, but strong enough to do something impossible? Because very often I need some impossible things done in my life. In retrospect, the 3 or more portal ending fits pretty well with the Bible's full revelation as you go through the stories of the Bible of who this God is that's strong enough to create the heavens and the earth. He has this plural nature, this Father, Son, and Spirit that makes up God. You know, there are a lot of places scattered throughout the Old and New Testament that affirm that these three, what we call the Trinity and its mystery, are all involved in the work of creation. But I'll be honest, that's a pretty long study, and we're not going to get off on it today. I'm not going to chase down all the references for you. But I want you to consider that we would not survive very long without the impossible things that God has done as Father, Son, and Spirit, as He has created the world with us and for us. I also want you to consider that God, Elohim, we're made in His image, and so it might imply that we're also a little more complex. We, Adam, are male and female in spirit. Now, I'm not sure how far to really push that point, but we are made in His image, and He has a plural image, and perhaps, we better reflect that image when we embrace its plural nature whenever we are joined in marriage with someone else. You know, those passages that talk about the two becoming one, and there's obviously at least two people, and the Spirit of God that's with them that makes three, kind of has a God kind of look to it. That too is another story, marriage, and how it comes into play a little later in the book of Genesis, and so I don't want to get too far sidetracked into it, but the seeds are laid in this first part for it. Another lesson that you could learn from the story is that, well, Elohim is the creator. I mean, that's a pretty basic one. We should at least pick that up. The Hebrew term translated create is a word that actually means to cut. Most of the people don't look up the word that often because it doesn't go with our theology of God creating, this idea of cutting. But at least for the ancients, they used this term for cutting to talk about how you would shape something from its natural state, like a branch, into something useful like the shaft of an arrow. You would create an arrow. You would take this otherwise, natural stated thing, and you would make it useful. That's what the word create means. God is depicted as shaping the earth out of which was formerly formless and void and dark. Everything that God does to shape the heavens and the earth, down to the very smallest detail, is claimed not only to be good, but to be very good. And so we need to understand that there's goodness. Sometimes in the church we only talk about badness, we talk about sin, and we talk about the other. But there's original goodness that we need to embrace in the idea of the story of creation. What might surprise you as you go through this again, and I know a lot of us have seen this stuff, and you've heard this story for so long that you're probably going like, come on, get through it. We know about creation. But it's a story that builds foundations for us. Did you notice that there's no specific place in the story where it says God created something out of nothing? I kept looking for that. It's implied. It's the obvious assumption when you read this story. I don't know where you could come up with a different idea, but we aren't actually told that he takes something out of nothing. But we do have this day after day renewal of something new that's still a part of the world that we live in today, that was shaped by God, taking it from this chaotic natural state and putting it together in a useful order that's made for us. God shapes this order, and like him, we often try to do the same thing. Aren't we always trying to bring order out of the chaotic things in our lives? Whether it be relationships or situations or even just the stuff around us. I remember looking at some of these gardens over in England. There are these amazing gardens that have all of this stuff in it. And you know, it's just incredible amount of work. And it's pretty useful now. You can paths to walk on, and there's places that you can rest in, and the flowers are all around it. It's an amazing work. And there's someone that went up there and looking at it going like, man, you know, God's creation is so beautiful. And of course the gardener is saying, yeah, you should have seen it when it was just God alone working on it. We finally got this thing in order. Yeah, we want to shape, and we want to create, we want to make things. And that's a part of our identity. We also learned from the story that there was this progression of 6 days, right? I mean, how can you not pick that up if you read this story? That over these 6 days, God shapes the heavens and the earth, bringing them into something useful. The term that gets translated days is the word yom, which is translated as day, but it's a word that actually means warm. I don't know if you knew that or not. That's what yom means, warm. A day ended when the warmth ended. But the beginning of a new day did not start at the next morning. It began with evening. It included the night. And then it went through the next morning. Yom, or day, is primarily used to speak of what we know as the 24 hours it takes for the earth to rotate, warming itself on the sun. But yom is occasionally used in other parts of the Bible to talk about longer periods of time, like a season, or to indicate a specific point in time, like the day of Elijah or the day of the Lord. Time we pick up from this creation story is linear. That it has progression to it, that there's a beginning, and then as each day continues, we have history that gets created. And as we go forward, we build on what went behind us. And so we can say, along with the psalmist, that even today is the day that the Lord has made. And we can rejoice and be glad in it because of all the things that God has put together for us. We learn, as I've already pointed out in a couple of different ways, that the focus of God's creation is you. They, Elohim, shaped Adam, the first people, in their Elohim image and likeness, and he, that's Elohim again, directs them, Adam, to rule over all that was created. You get to this point in the creation story, and you can't escape the fact that we're central to it. We're told more about how God shaped the first male and female in the next chapter. But if we go off into that story, you're going to have a really late lunch, and so I'm going to refrain from going off into it. But it is worth your time to become familiar with the continuation and focus of just the creation of us. It too has a lot of lessons to learn from it. Lessons that can help you sort through issues that our world is struggling with. Issues about gender, about race, and about justice. You'll hear some things in that next story that would help you weigh those waters as you confront them and say, well, what should I do in these discussions? Or how should I think of myself or the people around us? And how can I do that with love? We're told in this particular story that Elohim shaped the heavens and the earth with everything that Adam might need to be fruitful and multiply. I mean, all those things that get created around us, they're for us. They're so we can be fruitful. What does fruitful even mean for you? You know, how can you get to the end point? You know, whenever you take a tree, you plant something, right? You put the seed in the ground, and it has to go through all of this growth, and then it finally gets to the point that it has a fruit to it. And we are supposed to be doing that kind of thing too. We're supposed to be bearing fruit. You might just wonder a little bit, what's the kind of fruit that God wants me to be bearing? At least for me, I go straight to the fruits of the Spirit, the kinds of things that maybe I'm supposed to be producing in my life. And we are supposed to be multiplying. Not only in the way that fills up the earth with a bunch of more people, but I also think we're supposed to be multiplying in a way that brings more believers into understanding who God is and the relationship in their life. There's a lot of concern about how do we control population. And there are a lot of issues that get brought up into it, some passionate ones about it. And these stories help us understand a way to approach those subjects so that we can best address them. And we get to sort of the end of the story after all of this work is done. And I don't know what work really means for God. I mean, if you're all powerful, I don't know, if he really does get worn out at the end of the day. I'm just not sure about that. But I know what it is for us. I know at the end of the day we get worn out. But we are told that after Elohim has shaped the heavens and the earth, he rests for a day. And the word for rest is sabaoth. We get the word Sabbath from it. And it says that that day was made separate, or depending on your translation, it was made holy. Holy is a translation of a Hebrew word that simply does mean to keep apart from everything else that might contaminate it. We understand how that works. So instead of working, God rests. And this day of rest is not supposed to be contaminated with work. We need to rest. We need to recover. We need to rejuvenate. We need to recreate. We need to get recharged after work. But it does imply work, right? So there's got to be something for us to do. We need to be working. We need to be involved in purpose and process and doing something that brings about good things. And it's okay to get wore out from it, even on a weekly scale of just 6 days of work. Now, most of us think 6 days are way too many days to be working. Let's get it back to 5, or maybe even only 4. If we could get a 3-day work week passed, we might be okay with that. But we probably not keep those non-working days separate. We'd probably fill them up with working kind of things too. But there's something to be said about working so that you can rest. And so we need to work so that we can rest. Part of our coming together is part of the way we rest. Just like we need our body to recuperate, when we gather together and we worship together, there is a renewal that takes place in us. When we show up here, we should be sort of worn out from the week. Instead of going, hey, how's everything going? Go like, man, I'm tired. I'm wore out. I'm sort of struggling. And by the time we get done here, we should be rejuvenated in a sense that we're better and we're ready to take on those next 6 days. And so I want to encourage you to think about some of those lessons. You might have been going through this and, hey, Doug, you missed this lesson and that lesson and this lesson. There are a lot more lessons to learn from this story. But I wanted to give you just enough to entice you, just enough to challenge you to look at this story again for yourself. And don't approach it academically. I don't want to hear you list off, well, here are the 6 days of creation. Here's all the things I found. Here are all the words. That's not what we need to learn from this. We need to be able to say, hey, God, you've given me this story so I know who I am and who you are. And this story helps me understand our relationship and my relationship with the people in the world around me. And those are the kinds of things that you should take from it. I could go on, but I'm not going to. I'm I'm sure that this is enough to challenge you to become more familiar even with that which you already know. We are not the result of some incidental mutation that has left us with only a driving force and need to survive at all costs. We are much, much more than that. We're going to have a hymn of invitation. And if you've been looking for a God who can guide you and sustain you and create in you all that you need, I invite you to look for the Lord. For He is the God of creation. And He is strong enough to do whatever you need in your life. Would you please stand?